Hashtag YouTube voiceover script. The billionaire's quadruplets were deaf, until the poor maid did what no one expected. James Anderson stood on his mansion's patio, watching his 4 sons play in the garden. They ran, they chased each other, they even smiled sometimes. But they lived in complete silence. They hadn't heard a single sound in 2 years. 6-year-old twins, Mason and Liam, played together. Mason in his green shirt and plaid shorts, Liam in his yellow shirt and black shorts. 5-year-old Aiden followed them in his blue and white striped shirt and red shorts. 4-year-old Tyler, the youngest, toddled behind in his white shirt and blue jeans. All 4 boys were completely deaf. It had been 2 years since the accident. 2 years since James's wife Sarah had died in a car crash, right in front of the school where the boys were waiting. They'd seen everything. The screeching tires, the horrible impact, the chaos that followed. Mason had screamed for his mother. They all had. But Sarah never answered. Within 48 hours, all 4 boys stopped responding to sound. Complete hearing loss. Every medical test showed their ears were physically perfect. No damage, no blockages, nothing wrong. But they couldn't hear anything. Psychogenic deafness, the specialist called it. Conversion disorder triggered by severe trauma. Their brains shut down their hearing to protect them from the sounds of that day. Their mother's screams, the crash, the sirens. It's extremely rare, especially in all 4 children simultaneously. James had spent millions trying to help them. Audiologists, neurologists, trauma therapists, hypnotherapists. Nothing worked. His sons lived in a world of absolute silence, communicating only through basic sign language and gestures they'd learned. The boys had changed in other ways too. They flinched at sudden movements. They cried in their sleep. They drew pictures of cars and crashes. But most heartbreaking of all, they'd stopped trying to speak. Why use your voice when you can't hear it yourself? Mr. Anderson. A warm voice spoke behind him. James turned to see Grace Okafor, the new nanny he'd hired 2 weeks ago. She wore her black maid's dress with the white apron, holding a red garden hose. At 26, she was younger than previous caregivers, but she'd learned sign language specifically for this job and treated his sons with such genuine warmth. Grace, please call me James. It's quite hot today, Grace signed and spoke simultaneously. I thought the boys might enjoy playing with water. Is that all right? James nodded. At least they could still experience joy through their other senses. Grace walked down to the garden. The boys saw her with the hose and got excited, jumping up and down, signing water and play enthusiastically. Grace turned on the water and began spraying gentle arcs into the air. The water caught the sunlight, creating rainbows. Mason ran through first, laughing silently. Liam followed, then Aiden, then little Tyler. James had seen this scene before. The boys playing, enjoying themselves, but always in that haunting silence they couldn't escape. But then something strange happened. Grace began spraying the water in a specific rhythm. Long spray, short bursts. Long spray, short bursts. And she was singing loudly, her voice carrying across the garden. Rain, rain, go away. Come again another day. The boys couldn't hear her, of course. But suddenly, Tyler stopped running. He put his hand on his chest, his small face scrunched up in confusion. Then Mason stopped too, touching his own chest with a puzzled expression. Grace kept spraying in rhythm, kept singing. One by one, all 4 boys stopped playing and stood still, their hands pressed against their chests, looking around in bewilderment. James stood up straighter. What was happening? Grace noticed the boys' reactions and her eyes widened. She turned off the hose and all 4 boys immediately looked disappointed, searching for something they'd lost. She turned it back on and their faces lit up with wonder, hands flying back to their chests. Mr. Anderson, Grace called urgently. James, come here quickly. James ran down the patio steps, his heart pounding. The boys were all touching their chests, their throats, their ears, looking confused and excited and scared all at once. What's happening? James asked breathlessly. Watch, Grace said, her voice shaking. She turned off the hose. The boys' faces fell. She turned it back on and started singing again. And all 4 boys pressed their hands against their chests, their eyes going wide. They're feeling something, Grace whispered. James, I don't think they're completely deaf. I think they're feeling the vibrations. The water spray is creating pressure changes in the air, and my voice is creating vibrations. They can't hear it the normal way, but they're perceiving it somehow. Tyler suddenly opened his mouth and made a sound, a rough, unpracticed vocalization. Ah! It wasn't a word, but it was intentional. He was trying to recreate what he was feeling. James felt his legs go weak. Tyler signed frantically. Something in chest, like Mommy's songs before. Before the accident, James breathed. He remembers the feeling of sound from before he went deaf. Grace knelt down, still spraying the water rhythmically. She gently took Tyler's hand and placed it on her throat while she sang. Tyler's eyes went impossibly wide. Tears started streaming down his face. Then Tyler did something that made James's heart stop. He opened his mouth and made a sound that was unmistakably trying to be a word. M. Mommy. Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face, he's trying to say mommy. Liam started crying, pressing both hands against his throat, trying to make sounds too. Mommy. The dam broke. All 4 boys began crying, making rough vocalizations, touching their chests and throats, overwhelmed by sensations they hadn't felt in 2 years. James dropped to his knees in the wet grass and gathered all 4 boys into his arms. They were sobbing, making sounds, their small bodies shaking. Mason pulled back and signed desperately. I feel Mommy's song in my chest, like before bad day. Is Mommy here? James's heart shattered. No, sweetheart. Mommy's not here, but Grace is singing Mommy's song. The one she used to sing to you in the bath. Can't hear, Mason signed, fresh tears falling. But feel it. Feel her. Grace was crying now too. James, this is incredible. Their ears might not work, but their bodies are perceiving sound through vibration and pressure. The water spray, the singing, it's creating enough physical sensation that they're experiencing sound in a completely different way. Can this help them? James asked desperately. I don't know, but we have to try. We need specialists who understand vibrational therapy, bone conduction, alternative sensory processing. Tyler pressed his hand to James's throat. Daddy talk, he signed. Want feel daddy. James began speaking, his voice breaking with emotion. I love you. I love all 4 of you. Daddy's here. Daddy's always here. Tyler's face crumpled with joy and grief. He could feel his father's voice as vibrations against his palm. Not hearing it, but experiencing it in a new way. They've been living in complete sensory deprivation, Grace said softly. No sound at all for 2 years. But James, they don't have to. We can give them back a version of sound, not through their ears, but through their whole bodies. That evening, James made calls to every specialist he could find. Within a week, his home was transformed. Vibrational platforms installed in every room. Bone conduction headphones. Bass speakers that transmitted sound through physical sensation. Music therapists who specialized in deaf children. The first breakthrough came with the bone conduction devices. When James spoke into a microphone connected to the boys' headphones, they could feel his voice vibrating through their skulls directly to their inner ears, bypassing their damaged hearing pathway. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't like normal hearing. But Tyler felt his father say, I love you, for the first time in 2 years and burst into tears of joy. Within weeks, all 4 boys were wearing the devices daily. They learned to associate certain vibration patterns with specific words. They learned to feel the rhythm of speech, music, laughter. But the real miracle came 3 months later. Grace was in the garden with the boys, doing their daily vibrational therapy session. She had them lying on a special platform that transmitted music directly through their bodies. She was playing a recording, Sarah's voice, singing the bath time song. The boys could feel their mother's voice vibrating through them. Mason started crying. Then Liam, then Aiden, then Tyler. But suddenly, Tyler sat bolt upright. "Hear it," he signed frantically. "Hear Mommy. Not just feel, hear." Grace's hands froze. "What?" "Mommy's singing in my ears. Real sound." Grace pulled out her phone and snapped her fingers behind Tyler's head. Something she'd done hundreds of times in the past 3 months. He'd never reacted. This time, Tyler turned around. "Oh my God," Grace breathed. "James. James." James came running. "What's wrong?" "Tyler can hear, actually hear. Not just vibrations, real sound." They tested it immediately. James stood behind Tyler and spoke. "Can you hear Daddy?" Tyler spun around, his face a mixture of shock and joy. "Daddy, yes. Your voice sounds funny, but I hear it." Over the next hour, they discovered that the constant vibrational therapy had somehow stimulated Tyler's auditory system. The psychogenic block, the mental shutdown that had stolen his hearing, was breaking down. His brain was remembering how to process sound again. Within days, Aiden began hearing too. Then Mason, then finally Liam. Their hearing wasn't perfect. Certain frequencies were harder to perceive. Loud noises still frightened them. They'd need therapy for years. But they could hear their father's voice, Grace's voice, music, laughter, birds, rain. The sounds their brains had shut out to protect them from trauma were slowly, carefully being welcomed back. 6 months after that day with the garden hose, James stood on his patio watching a very different scene. Grace was in the garden with the boys, spraying them with water just like that first day. But now the garden was filled with sound. Real sound that the boys could actually hear. "Spray me next," Mason shouted. "My turn," Liam laughed. "Grace, make it go high," Aiden called. Tyler's voice, the smallest but clearest, sang out, "Rain, rain, go away. Come again another day." Grace walked up to the patio, her black dress and apron soaked, her face glowing with joy. "You gave them back their hearing," James said softly. "No," Grace shook her head. "Their hearing was always potentially there. The trauma had locked it away. The vibrational therapy gave their brains a safe way to remember what sound felt like. Once they realized sound wasn't something to fear anymore, that it could bring joy and connection instead of trauma, their minds unlocked the door." James looked at her with overwhelming gratitude. "Grace, you've become so much more than a nanny to us. You've become family." "These boys healed me too," Grace said, her eyes shining with tears. "They taught me that healing isn't about erasing trauma. It's about finding new ways to experience joy despite it." If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to Story Sphere. Share it with someone who needs to remember that healing isn't about erasing pain. It's about finding safe ways to experience joy again.